Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, there was a kingdom where the fields were green, the skies were blue, and the rivers sparkled like diamonds. In this kingdom, there lived a king and queen who were beloved by their people. The queen was kind and wise, and the king was brave and just. They ruled their kingdom with love and fairness. But there was one thing they wished for more than anything else in the world, a child. One winter's day, as snowflakes gently fell from the sky, the queen sat by her window, sewing. She pricked her finger with her needle, and 3 drops of blood fell onto the snow. As she looked at the bright red drops against the white snow, she thought to herself, I wish for a child with skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony. Soon after, her wish came true, and she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, whom she named Snow White. Snow White grew up to be a kind and gentle girl, loved by everyone in the kingdom. She had the most enchanting voice and could often be heard singing with the birds in the palace gardens. Her beauty was so remarkable that even the sun seemed to shine a little brighter when she was around. However, as time passed, the queen fell gravely ill and soon passed away, leaving the king and Snow White heartbroken. The king, wanting Snow White to have a motherly figure in her life, remarried a woman who was beautiful but vain and cruel. This new queen possessed a magical mirror, which she often consulted to assure herself of her beauty. Every day she would ask, Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? And the mirror would reply, You, my queen, are the fairest of them all. Years went by, and Snow White grew even more beautiful, with her skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony. One day, when the queen asked her mirror the usual question, it responded differently. You, my queen, are fair. It is true, but Snow White is even fairer than you. The queen's face turned as red as her lips with anger. She could not bear the thought of anyone being more beautiful than she was. The queen summoned a huntsman and commanded him to take Snow White deep into the forest and, with a heavy heart, get rid of her. The huntsman was horrified but dared not disobey the queen. He took Snow White into the forest. But when he saw her innocence and beauty, he couldn't bring himself to harm her. Instead, he told her to run far away and never return to the castle. Grateful and scared, Snow White fled into the depths of the forest. As Snow White wandered through the dark forest, she felt frightened and alone. The trees seemed to whisper and groan, and strange noises filled the air. But Snow White was brave and kept moving forward. Soon, she came upon a charming little cottage with a thatched roof and tiny windows. She knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Curious and tired, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The cottage was cozy and neat, but everything inside it was tiny chairs, tiny tables, and tiny beds. Snow White noticed that the table was set for 7, with 7 little plates and 7 little cups. Feeling exhausted, she tried each of the 7 beds until she found one that was just right and fell fast asleep. As the sun set, the owners of the cottage returned home. They were 7 dwarfs who worked in the nearby diamond mines. Their names were Doc, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Bashful, Sneezy, and Dopey. They were surprised to find their cottage in disarray and were even more shocked to discover Snow White sleeping in one of their beds. "Who is she?" asked Grumpy, frowning. "She's so beautiful," exclaimed Happy. "We should wake her gently," suggested Doc, who was the leader of the group. Snow White awoke to find the 7 dwarfs gathered around her, their faces filled with curiosity and kindness. She told them her story, and they listened intently. The dwarfs were moved by her plight and offered her a place to stay. "You can stay with us as long as you like," said Doc, "but you must be careful. The queen will surely try to find you." Snow White was grateful and promised to be careful. She helped the dwarfs with their chores, and in return, they taught her about the forest and their work in the diamond mines. Snow White and the 7 dwarfs became great friends, and their days were filled with laughter and joy. Meanwhile, back at the castle, the queen consulted her mirror once again. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" she asked. The mirror replied, "You, my queen, are fair." "It is true, but Snow White, beyond the mountains with the 7 dwarfs, is still 1,000 times fairer than you." The queen was furious. She disguised herself as an old peddler woman and set off to find Snow White. She soon discovered the cottage where Snow White lived and knocked on the door. "Good day, dearie," she said in a sweet, raspy voice when Snow White opened the door. "Would you like to buy a lovely lace bodice?" Snow White, not recognizing the queen in disguise, agreed and led the old woman in. The queen helped Snow White try on the lace bodice and laced it so tightly that Snow White couldn't breathe and fell to the floor unconscious. The queen cackled with glee and left, convinced that Snow White was gone for good. But the dwarfs returned home just in time. They found Snow White and quickly loosened the bodice, reviving her. Snow White told them what had happened, and the dwarfs warned her to be even more cautious. The queen, back at her castle, asked her mirror once again, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror replied, "You, my queen, are fair. It is true, but Snow White, beyond the mountains with the 7 dwarfs, is still 1,000 times fairer than you." The queen was livid. She disguised herself again, this time as an old apple seller. She returned to the cottage and offered Snow White a beautiful, shiny red apple. Snow White, who had learned to be cautious, hesitated. "It's a magic apple," said the queen in disguise. "One bite will grant you your heart's deepest desire." Curious and trusting, Snow White took a bite. As soon as she did, she fell to the floor, unconscious once more. The queen laughed wickedly and disappeared into the forest. When the dwarfs returned, they found Snow White lying on the floor, the half-eaten apple by her side. They tried everything they could to revive her, but nothing worked. Believing her to be dead, they laid her in a glass coffin in the forest, where they could always watch over her. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, but Snow White remained as if asleep. One day, a handsome prince was riding through the forest and saw the glass coffin. He was struck by Snow White's beauty and asked the dwarfs about her. They told him her story, and the prince was deeply moved. "I must try to awaken her," he said. He leaned over and gently kissed Snow White. At that moment, the magic spell was broken, and Snow White opened her eyes. She sat up, looking around in confusion. until her eyes met the prince's. The dwarfs cheered with joy, and Snow White smiled, grateful to be alive. The prince asked Snow White to return to his kingdom and be his bride. Snow White, feeling a deep connection with the prince, agreed. The prince and Snow White returned to the castle, where the wicked queen was still living. The queen, unaware that Snow White was alive, asked her mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror replied, "You, my queen, are fair. It is true, but the young queen is 1,000 times fairer than you." The wicked queen was enraged. She stormed into the throne room, only to find Snow White and the prince. Realizing she had been defeated, she fled the kingdom, never to be seen again. Snow White and the prince were married in a grand celebration. The 7 dwarfs were guests of honor, and they danced and sang with joy. The kingdom rejoiced, and Snow White and the prince ruled with kindness and wisdom, ensuring that their people lived happily ever after. And so, Snow White found her true love and her happily ever after, surrounded by her friends and loved ones. The kingdom prospered, and the story of Snow White and the 7 dwarfs was told for generations. A tale of bravery, kindness, and the triumph of good over evil. The end.